good evening. Would the panel kindly introduce themselves, starting with Coughlin on my nearest left. Con.
Good evening, and welcome to Frontline Club. Paddy's asked me to say a few things about myself. I'm a journalist. I've been working as a foreign correspondent on and off for 25 years, mainly covering the Middle East, which is where my interest in Iran derives from. I remember when I was a young reporter in Beirut in the early 1980s, and a group called Hezbollah started kidnapping all my friends from the Commodore Hotel. I sort of felt rather inclined to take an interest in what this group was about and who was behind them. I suppose, if I'm honest, that was the origins of my interest in Iran. I was a bit too young for the Iranian Revolution. I read about it and watched it on the television, but didn't follow it as a correspondent. But the genesis of my book, Khomeini's Ghost, which is a study of Iran since the Khomeini Revolution of 1979, is really looking at the influence the Khomeini revolutions had on the wider region, and the ideology stroke philosophy which has driven that regime. And of course an important element of that, which I think we want to discuss tonight, is the regime's interest in nuclear matters. Now, where is Iran on the nuclear front? Well, it's very hard to know. I mean, the world's best intelligence services are still struggling to work this out. What we do know is that they have developed a very sophisticated nuclear program, a lot of it in secret, undeclared to international monitoring bodies, and they also, until 2003, had a nuclear military program. Whether that's been resumed or not, we don't know.
Thank you very much. No longer Julian, but a bit of yourself and a bit of overview, if you like.
Right, my name's Julian Borger. I'm the diplomatic editor on The Guardian. I run a global security blog as well, which focuses on issues nuclear of late. So
bear with me, people can't hear. Do we have any speakers? Or turning off the wind machine? Julian, will you keep going but speak up? And
okay.
If a speaker comes, speak down.
Right. Okay.
Start again.
Shall I start again?
Please do. Yeah. Okay. Shout for the man in the back. Look
the
at
man in the back. My name's Julian Borger. I'm the diplomatic editor on The Guardian. I also run a global security blog that focuses on matters nuclear. A lot of that recently has been about Iran. Obviously, Iran is the main proliferation issue facing the world at the moment, at least the central one, the one that has attracted most attention, and I've been following it since I was in the Middle East in the 90s, and then again in Washington for 8 years. Since 98, 99, Iran has always been a thorn in the side of Washington, and this has been a long-running struggle over Iran's nuclear industry, and to this day the jury is out over whether it is one that has taken a step towards weaponization. But this could be a very critical moment right now. A deal was done perhaps in Geneva, and we'll see whether it's a turning point.
But not to ask you to go on at this point. You were in Geneva.
That's right.
Right. So please give us these details. Sorry, we like to know them. John, would you introduce yourself and give us the relevant detail?
I'm Jon Leyne. I am still the BBC's Tehran correspondent, although not currently in Tehran, as I was expelled 10 days after the election. During my 2 years in Tehran, I travelled literally the four corners of the country. I've been to all four borders, north, south, east and west. I hope I've covered a corresponding range of stories about Iranian life, although obviously the nuclear issue and the confrontation with the West came up every now and then. I have been inside the Bushehr nuclear reactor. I have been outside Natanz, and I have the rare claim to fame of having actually seen an Iranian centrifuge in anger. And I've also covered nuclear issues over the years concerning obviously Iraq and North Korea as correspondent at State Department, correspondent to the UN, and without insulting any nuclear scientists who may be present and who may humiliate me with their knowledge, I believe nuclear science is actually fundamentally very simple. Making it work is obviously the work of great brains, but the principles are very simple and can be learnt in a matter of hours. Is Iran's program military or civilian? That's a fundamental question. I'm not going to answer it now, but in one sentence I would say it is definitely more than a civilian program, but probably less than a military program at the moment.
So we'll come to questions. Can everyone hear better now, can I ask? Yes. OK, that's the most important thing. Please let me know if you can't. Would people just give some introductions of their own? If it's an embarrassing silence, then we won't continue it. But either your interest in the subject or your expertise from the floor. Yes, sir, shout up.
I represent an index on censorship at the release of Anunu. In fact, I've been involved in the case since '86 and did the affidavits in front of the Supreme Court in 2004 summer.
This is the Israeli...
this is Israeli atomic project, yeah.
So the gentleman in the front...
And I've written a book, America's Children, on the American Atomic Bomb Project.
The gentleman in the front has interest in Israel's nuclear program and Anunu. Anyone else want to... and written a book. Anyone else want to reveal more about themselves? Yes, sir, please. And the microphone's coming. Just let's be brief, let's be brisk about it, and then we'll all get on.
My name is Nader Rastegar, and I'm an Iranian exile, quote unquote. And I think I represent the voice of many, or share the same sentiments as many Iranians outside the Iran. And the question is, why is Iran being targeted so severely for nuclear issues, whereas Israel is not even requested to join IAEA?
And we're going to get to your question. And at this stage, if anyone else wants to introduce either their expertise or themselves, yes, sir, and then we'll move to the first part of the evening.
I'm Frank Jackson of the World Disarmament Campaign, totally opposed to all nuclear weapons everywhere ever since they've existed, and also opposed to nuclear power because of the links which are inevitable between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. But I am opposed to the demonization of Iran at the present time because I believe that makes the whole situation worse.
So again, ladies and gentlemen, this is in the tradition of an old-style public meeting, which are fading away. There's no time. No, we'll have to come back to you. Be quick, because it goes very quickly. We've run one of these before. The audience is why you're here, and that's why I want to stress your role this evening. I don't want you to just be preached at from the panel. But I'd like to ask you to answer this in turn. Coughlin, the question that's brought everyone tonight who's paid is the Islamic Republic nuclear program. What is the state of it? Is it, and what is its intent? Without, please, taking the whole hour.
Right, OK. Well, I wasn't in Geneva like Julian, but I've spoken to people from the British delegation who were. And I think the main purpose of Geneva really was for the Iranians to give the West, Russia and China and everybody else, reassurances that their nuclear program intentions were peaceful. And the British delegation certainly came away with the feeling that they hadn't done that, and that the gestures that they made were pretty hollow. Where is Iran's nuclear program? Well, you know, I'm not a nuclear scientist, I'm not an intelligence agent, you know, I don't know what's going on in the towns, etc. As I said in the introduction, we do know from the National Intelligence Estimate, which nobody has argued with, that until 2003 they did have a military nuclear program, one which was never declared to the IAEA. Whether they've resumed that, we don't know. But the fact that they've just developed another uranium enrichment site at Qum, which is basically, as far as we can tell, buried in a mountain, they haven't allowed the inspectors in yet, they're going at the end of the month. We know that previously, when they've been embarrassed into revealing the existence of sites, they've done incredible things like remove them, remove the soil, clean it all up before the inspectors arrive. So Qum is suspicious. Britain has a nuclear program. We have nuclear weapons. We have one enrichment site. The Iranians are building two. Why? If you're going to build a second enrichment site, then you need to have other support establishments, such as the conversion facilities, etc. The omens do not look good, and the Iranians are not helping us, and that's where we are.
To go it another way, the main bulk of the Iranian nuclear program came to light in 2002 when it was revealed by an Iranian opposition group, and they revealed at the same time the enrichment site in Natanz and a heavy water reactor in Iraq. They also have a uranium conversion site in Isfahan. So the idea is you take the yellow cake, uranium yellow cake, it's converted into uranium hexafluoride at the conversion plant. That can be fed into the spinning centrifuges in Isfahan and enriched to either less than 5% for nuclear power, which is what they're doing at the moment, and they have enriched about 1.6 metric tons of low-enriched uranium. Or you can keep the centrifuges spinning, reconfigure them, and enrich up to 90%, which would make it weapons grade. Now, the IAEA is there in Natanz with monitors watching what is happening in Natanz, but that's the alarm caused by the discovery, the admission of the Coughlin enrichment plant, that there might be a separate parallel program where the IAEA, the world's eyes are distracted at Natanz, and a parallel program is going on in secret. And that was always the great worry, that a weaponization program might be going ahead using the expertise gained in places like Natanz and Isfahan, and that's the big open question.
On my theme of making nuclear bombing very simple, even if you can't quite do it in your garden shed, there's two basic things you need for a bomb: weaponization and the nuclear material, the high explosives, if you like. Weaponization, fundamentally, intelligence services are divided over whether it's currently going on. All the Western ones believe Iran's done it in the past. Europeans mostly believe Iran is still doing it, as do the Israelis. The Americans are more skeptical, partly because they were burnt over the Iraq issue. On the other issue, which is actually the more complicated end, is actually producing the nuclear material. And that's what they're suspected of doing in Natanz. There are other ways they could use the Bushehr reactor and the Arak heavy water reactor, but they don't seem such an immediate threat. Natanz, if it proceeds as it is now, it's got international inspectors, they've got cameras there. The enriched uranium is monitored, although I'm not convinced very, very closely. And it's only 3 or 4% grade, not good enough grade, as you're saying, for a bomb. So to produce a bomb, you need 95%. But it's a very simple process. You can almost literally take it out one end of your centrifuges, put it back in the other end, tweak the dials, and you can turn your 3, 4, 5% enriched uranium to 95%. So the fear is Iran's got this low enriched uranium, probably enough to make a bomb, but it needs to be turned into 95%. So either they can do it at Natanz, but they'd have to kick out the inspectors, cause them problems. Or they can do it in a secret site, and that's what we're worried about, the secret site. So the fear is that the other thing about Natanz is, just very briefly, is that Ahmadinejad, of course, keeps saying it's for a civilian program. The one key thing that never gets said, and you'll hear me say it and you won't believe it, the material in Natanz cannot be used at Bushehr, and there is no other nuclear reactor in Iran it can be used in. It cannot be used in Bushehr because it is technically not suitable, and it cannot be used in Bushehr because it is a strict condition of the Russians that they won't let it to be used there.
And this is a plant that the Russians are building for nuclear power, and you're saying that uranium produced or enriched elsewhere in Iran can't be used in that plant?
It cannot be used. The Natanz uranium, so you may say, well, that's the clincher. It must be for making a bomb. That doesn't necessarily follow, because even the mere act of enriching uranium, in Iran's eyes, gives it more leverage, gives it more power, gives it more status, gives it negotiating, as we saw with North Korea. Even one extra centrifuge gives Iran to a degree more power, more leverage in negotiations. So you can still debate what its intentions are, but I think it's clear Iran is doing, it's more than a purely civilian program, but it's not proven yet that it's a purely military program either.
And I think there's unanimity from the panel. So let's go to this lady here and have a view. This is on the question of the Iranian nuclear program.
Yes.
Rather, please add to this.
My name is Sharon Tabari. I'm from Radio Free Europe Radio, from Sharon Tabari from Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty. And my question is that at the, maybe Julian can answer that, at the Geneva, the agreement that was made there that Iran would have its uranium enrichment in Russia. And some people are very optimistic about that, some are not as optimistic about it. What do you think? Do you think that that agreement is workable? And if Iran agrees that its uranium would be enriched in Russia, do you, in the light of a new it's not a new evidence that much that Russia has helped Iran in many ways. Netanyahu has recently been in Russia and told Medvedev that he has evidences that Russian scientists or he didn't mention necessarily Russian government has helped Iran in its nuclear enrichment. And in the light of that, do you think that moving the uranium enrichment to Russia is workable, is problem-free, or we're going to hear again and again that there are breakdown of the agreements? Thank you.
Well, yeah, today there's a bit of doubt cast on it. I think Press TV were reporting that the Supreme National Security Council was saying, "Oh no, we didn't agree to anything in Geneva." It's a kind of usual thing with negotiations with Tehran. You agree one thing and then it's denied, and then you come back to the negotiating table and it starts again, but from a different point. So there is a bit of doubt. I mean, in theory, it could be a fantastic deal just for buying time for diplomacy, because the idea is if you take the uranium, and this would ultimately be for the Tehran research reactor, and to restock that research reactor, which is running out of fissile material, you would have to take out most of Iran's stock of LEU, low-enriched uranium. Some estimates up to 1,200 kg, which would be most of it, three-quarters of it. Go out to Russia, get further enriched to the purity level of 20% that they need for the Tehran research reactor, which is for medical uses, and then get turned into fuel in France. Now, that process alone would take a year, so it's a year in which the uranium is off the table and you have a breathing space. Plus, when it's been turned into fuel, it's very hard, almost impossible without reprocessing, to further enrich it. So it kind of freezes the level of enrichment of that chunk of uranium. So potentially, an extremely good deal. It respects Iran's rights under the NPT, but it diffuses tension and allows a bit more time to talk this problem out.
We've had 6 years of talking with Iran. As Julian said, we've known about these secret plants, there's another one now, since 2002. The Europeans, in the form of the EU3, Germany, France and Britain, spent 4 to 5 years negotiating with the Iranians. The fundamental feature that comes out of that is the Iranians are very good at stringing out a negotiating process while continuing with the enrichment process. And it suits the Iranians very well. And Obama and people were saying, right, Geneva, it's make or break. Well, the Iranians went along to Geneva and pulled off the contract of all contracts. And as Julian said, the Supreme Council is now saying, oh my God, we didn't actually say you could do any of this. But if you look at what the Iranians signed up to in Geneva, okay, they said they'd give over 3/4 of the LEU to Russia and France to be processed. While Russia and France are processing that, they can replace that at Natanz within a year. So that's no big deal. They said you can come and see CUM. Well, they shouldn't have been building CUM in the first place. But on the fundamental thing we went to Geneva for was a reassurance from this regime, from Mr. Ahmadinejad, from Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and all these people. We wanted reassurance from them that their intentions were peaceful. And they have, as yet, given us nothing. And all the time they string this process out, they are getting to a point where very soon they will have a capability to build a nuclear weapon if they so choose to do. And okay, they might decide not to, but if they've got that capability, then diplomacy is at an end. And that is what we're facing. And even the Obama administration, which has bent over backwards to accommodate Iran, despite all the repression we've seen with the elections in the summer, Even the Obama administration is saying if we don't get anything by December, we are going to get tough.
Just very briefly, the best case scenario, all this does is, on its own, all this does is postpone the issue for a year. Maybe that suits the Iranian regime in trouble at the moment. Maybe that suits Obama to show some gains for his policy. Worst case scenario is it's just a delaying tactic. Nothing's going to come of this deal. And as I was saying, they're still doing the things that the West is worried about, enriching, possible weaponization. Personally, the clincher is, are we actually going to see 1,200 kilos of this precious enriched uranium shipped out of Iran? I'm deeply skeptical where we're going to get at that moment.
Hi, Pendar Sovar. We've kind of heard quite a lot of detail, but it appears that there is a number of points that are really quite germane. I think the first point is that why would Iran want to develop nuclear weapons, or rather, sorry, nuclear energy, while it is an oil-rich country? Well, at the current rate of production, Iran's oil reserves will run out in 51 years. The question is, actually, the Iranian nuclear program was revealed in 2002. It was revealed in 2002 by Mujahideen Khalq organization, MKO, an organization which at the time was actually labeled as a terrorist organization by the US administration. However, they made that revelation, if I may call it that, on Pennsylvania Avenue, only 400 meters away from White House, even though they were rated and labeled as a terrorist organization. In 2003, Iran fully allowed all the nuclear inspectors, IAEA inspectors, to come to Iran. They went and looked at all the facilities. There was absolutely no requirement, and there is absolutely no requirement for Iran to declare any facilities, nor any other country to declare any facilities until 180 days before fissile material is introduced into a facility. And that goes for the facility near Qom as well. I think it's also germane that quite a lot of facilities that were being built in 2003 were actually declared to IAEA in 1978. All that Iran did was it restarted the program under the Shah. I think it's just important to note that Khamenei, previous president of Iran, actually closed down the nuclear establishment, put a seal on all the doors for 3 years, but the West did not guarantee that they would give fuel to Iran.
So can I ask you, do you consider our panel and what they've said to be anti-Iranian? Do you think that this is an unfair assessment? Will you just cut to the, cut to the argument?
Cutting to the chase, I think that if I look at the balance of, I mean, if you look at...
just sum it up. What do you?
Yes, and...
Yes.
Carter, from President Carter said so pretty much 48 hours ago.
Okay, let's discuss that with the gentleman.
On CNN.
Move the microphone to our Iranian colleague over here. You're putting a view, and you've heard what he says in detail, you're putting a view that's basically biased, and for the reasons that he's given you. He's named you dates.
I'm not giving a view. I'm just, if you talk to the people involved in this very difficult issue, I don't believe the British Foreign Office, the American State Department, the IAEA are making this up. The IAEA has been working very hard with the Atomic Energy Agency of Iran to try and resolve this. And at every step, the Iranians have failed to give a proper account of what they're doing. Now, that's where all this comes from. If the Iranians had nothing to hide, then why keep building all these facilities in secret? And as Julian was saying, why build a uranium enrichment plant that produces fissile material that doesn't even go into any of the power stations they have? It doesn't add up. And the fundamental problem here, as I said, is that we want the Iranians to reassure us that their intentions are honourable, to demonstrate their intentions are honourable, and then this will all be diffused. But for nearly a decade now, they failed to do that, and that's why it's not a question of being biased against Iran. We are concerned that we all go home and sleep in our beds safely, because the idea that this regime gets its hands on a nuclear weapon and given its friends around the region, I mean, I'm not sure we want to go down that route myself.
Just a point of fact that the rule is not that you have to say only 180 days before you open a nuclear facility. The Iran entered into an agreement with the IAEA to notify the agency when the decision was first taken to build a nuclear plant. They subsequently, in 2007, said, oh no, we want to pull out of that agreement. But the IAEA has been very straightforward and said, and said you can't unilaterally pull out of this agreement. You can't enter into an agreement with us and then one day say, oh, actually, I don't feel bound with that. And El-Baradei has gone on the record saying that on this case, enrichment plant, Iran is outside the law. So on that issue, the IAEA is quite straightforward.
John, bear with me one second. Yeah?
Can I just remind, from an Iranian perspective, first of all, for the past 8 years, Iran has been constantly threatened with being obliterated and attacked. And the present Secretary of State of the United States of America said so very clearly in no unambiguous terms. So for Iranians have always been under threats. I don't know how you can negotiate when you're under threats with major military powers of the world. How can it be a balance there? And to say that they've been negotiating with Iran. Number one, just. Number two, quickly, don't forget what they did to Iraq. Iraq allowed debilitating inspections. However, in the end, they pushed off Hans Blix and all reports that Iraq did not have WMD,
yes.
And they went and attacked Iraq. So is that what's going to happen to Iran?
Right, bear with me. Just can I ask you a question? Can you leave the gentleman with the microphone? What would you say in a sentence or a paragraph is the Iranian nuclear program? What is its purpose? What is its sophistication? Just answer the question that everyone else has been answering.
I think at most, the worst case scenario is deterrence from Israeli attacks. Israel does not want a strong Iran.
So you think it is a military purpose, even though you have these...
No, just the fact that they know if they strike a nuclear power plant,
yep,
it would have a diverse effect all over the region. They would not do it.
Right, the gentleman wants us to come to nuclear politics, which we're going to do in about 5 minutes. Is there anything else for the panel? And we'll come to your question. Just on what they've said so far. They've summed up what they think the programme is. That's what I'd like your questions on. This lady's had her hand up for the longest time. Nuclear politics follows. This is what the panel have said about the state of the programme.
Well, about the state of the programme, there are a lot of questions remaining. And what Geneva failed to achieve is to get answers on all the questions and get a commitment from the Islamic Republic to allow inspectors to visit all the plants, to allow inspectors to question all the scientists and all the documents that they have been asking. I'm an Iranian. I'm from Coughlin, London, an Iranian newspaper here. And I think perhaps the views of my Iranian brethren here is not shared by the entire Iranian community. Number one, the government that represented Iran at the Geneva talks cannot be considered as legitimate.
Okay, well, we'll pause there because that's another question. Has anyone else got questions, which I will come back to? Yes, here at the front on the nuclear programme. John, you can respond to this gentleman.
James Thacker again. I would put to you that nothing that's been said so far has been out of the context of the long history of proliferation. You're talking about a have-not from the point of view of the haves. And there's nothing you've said which is out of step with that. The only thing it seems to distinguish is that the Iranians' behavior it mimics the Israeli behavior, more or less. And I don't think that's not an accusation of the Israelis, but I mean I think that more or less explains everything you've said so far. So I mean,
right, keep the microphone, but we'll just tell the audience you're saying that what you've heard from the panel really could be applied to North Korea. It could be applied to other people who we don't like. Those funny other countries.
The same discussion went on with India. It's gone on with Israel for years. It's gone on with everyone. I mean, there are a lot of other projects that are sort of pending.
There's a fundamental difference there. Something which makes it more like the North Korean program, but less like India or Pakistan, is that the point is that it's not just the West that has made it a political issue. Iran itself has politicized its nuclear program. And that's why I say, it's one of the reasons I say it's more than a civilian program, but perhaps less than a military program.
But all nuclear programs are political, and they all go to weapons eventually.
Hear me. President Ahmadinejad in particular, and the previous governments didn't do this. If they just wanted nuclear power, they wouldn't be shouting the rooftops and getting the crowd to chant nuclear power is our national right. It is something Mr. Ahmadinejad has used for his own political purposes. I'm not judging it. I'm saying it as a fact. I think hard to deny. He has rallies at, when he raises the nuclear issue, he has used this issue as a domestic political issue and as an international political issue. So it's not just the poor old persecuted Iranians being bashed by the West. It's coming from both sides. They've chosen this as a battleground to fight on.
So I'm going to suggest we move on to politics. So you've had no. Give him another chance. This is now politics. You heard a bit on the programme.
The reason I came tonight was to hear you all say whether or not you actually thought Ahmadinejad would go to first strike, because I think that's what the question is in this. I mean, the Israelis struck Iraq first. Would Ahmadinejad, is this regime capable of going to first strike? That's what I'd like to hear.
Do you want to answer that, Con Coughlin?
Well, I think they'd like to. I don't think they'd be allowed to. I mean, I think if the... I mean, at the moment, we are in a diplomatic process. And I think all of us in this room want to stay in a diplomatic process. The fear is, and the concern is, that if the diplomatic process fails, and it will fail unless the Iranians, and I hear what you say about Iran being bullied, whatever. The fact is this has gone on for a very long time. The Iranians have had many, many years to give assurances about their real intentions. They have failed to do that satisfactorily. We are running out of time. If the diplomatic process fails, and there is evidence that Iran is trying to get a first strike capability, well, I just don't see anybody in the West, and that includes America, Britain, Israel, and France, allowing that to happen. So I can't see them getting to that possibility.
Keep it close, so we all want to hear you.
One sentence Mr. Coughlin said it bothered me, actually. He said we are not biased. I monitored his writing in the last 6-7 years. He wrote more than 50 articles about Iran without a single source about that. I wrote about that. I published that. My name is Majid Tafreshi. I'm a historian journalist.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I know.
About me on the internet.
Yes,
You read my Wikipedia.
Of course, yes. He wrote for the last 10 years on Iran, and 90% of them without a single traceable source.
Right.
And all of them were lies. And that's why we are Mr. Ahmadinejad now. He started from... He started from Mr. Khatami, and now we are affected by Ahmad. That's why Ahmadinejad come to power. That's because of people like him.
Okay, no, you can keep them. You're allowed to keep the microphone. You're allowed to keep the microphone. In the spirit of a public meeting, you've made that criticism. He says he'd like to meet you afterwards.
Of course.
Will you kindly join the overall discussion?
Yes, of course.
And would you give us a view yourself?
The current Iranian nuclear issues didn't start from Ahmadinejad. I never liked him. It started before that. On campaign, lying campaign against Iranian national interests started from Khatami time. That everyone praised him now.
Okay, and then this gentleman's second, and the panel will respond to you, and then you're third. You can be fourth. Now we're on the politics. We're on the politics of the programme.
Okay, Sajjad Khan, a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Islamic group. Can I just ask the panel about the first strike? The so-called quote that's used a lot, that Ahmadinejad threatened to wipe out Israel. Even assume that the quote is correct, because there is some contention. And I am actually an opponent of the Iranian government. I think it is as corrupt as most of the others in the Muslim world. But would the Iranians really be wiping out 5 million Palestinians, the third most holiest shrine in Islam in Jerusalem, in Masjid al-Aqsa, millions of Muslims in Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, and really go to the point of actually wiping out Israel around the map? So this myth that's being propagated, that somehow, even if Iran gets a capability, that somehow Israel faces an existential threat, I just find a lot of intelligent people just buying into that. And the other concern is, what about the real security concerns Iran has? 160,000 troops, in Iraq. McChrystal's now increasing troops in Afghanistan. Israel's got nuclear submarines. If you're Iran, you're looking at that map, haven't you got legitimate security considerations that you might want a put option on a nuclear weapon, even if you don't actually want one?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree that if you were, one of the three members of the Axis of Evil, as they were, since the famous Bush speech, and you saw one of those members, another member, Iraq, get invaded who didn't have nuclear arms, and North Korea continually offered economic aid, oil, all sorts of things because they do have nuclear arms. There's a fairly clear decision in terms of your national interest to either get them or at least give the impression that that you have them, or to be within that capacity. And there's no doubt as well that there is a double standard. You know, Israel and India, Pakistan, also outside the NPT, have developed nuclear arms. No one's going on about them from day to day. That's clearly true, but clearly the answer to the lack of, or the nuclear inequity, is not to hand out nuclear weapons, you know, across the world, or to make it easy to develop nuclear weapons across the world. The answer is clearly for the nuclear powers to disarm and for a stop to be put on further proliferation. And, you know, that, for the first time in many years, seems at least a direction that is possible to go in with you know, the beginning of the Start Follow-on Treaty and so on.
John, would you take the sense of our friend's question, which is about, if you were there, wouldn't you? And if you did, would you hit Palestinians and Israelis in equal measure? This is a gentleman's question.
Well, maybe you would, but let's think this through. Are you saying, is it rational for Iran to do a first strike? Well, of course it's not. But the fear is that the Iranian government has some, in our terms, rather irrational people in very senior positions of authority, people who believe the Mahdi is about to return, you know, the end of the world is nigh, effectively. You've got, maybe Ahmadinejad believes that or not, you never really know, do you? But you've certainly got Raheem Mashai, one of his closest advisors. You've got Ayatollah Mesbah Yazdi, who's clearly a believer in this, and other people close to him who have a very apocalyptic mindset. So people are a bit twitchy if they have a nuclear bomb. I think that's reasonable. Secondly, and I just want to answer head on the question earlier on about Israel, because I think there's a simple answer to this. And I'm not going to give you the answer, I'll give you the question. Are you more worried with the prospect of Israel having a bomb or Iran having a nuclear bomb? Well, it depends where you're sitting, but look at the countries in the Middle East. Hold on, just let me look at even countries that are not necessarily friends of Israel, like Saudi Arabia or Syria or Egypt. The bottom line is they haven't felt the need to develop a nuclear deterrent against Israel, and by a lot of accounts they would if Iran had one. So they're more worried about it. Whether we should be or not, okay, you may say that's irrational. I'll leave that to you.
Right, so you were responding. I know you're the next question, but can I just go to this gentleman? He interjected, and I'm trying to keep it along the lines of discussion. Say what you wanted to say.
Well, one of the things I want to say is about trust that you mentioned earlier. I don't think that the Iranians have any trust in the Europeans or the Americans whatsoever. They have played a major part in developing the second strike capability of Israel. They have given the submarines that they have been fielding in the Persian Gulf, the nuclear weapons, and the heavy water came from UK. The uranium went from France, all for payback for the Suez Canal crisis. It has been armed, and it is at our doorstep, and it is threatening us, and there is not a single word coming from the United Nations or from any of the European countries to get them to step back. You just have to listen to Eli Eliezer, the previous defense minister of Israel, who was threatening Iran every other day on Haaretz and Jerusalem Post. And you are saying that we are paranoid or we are irrational? Well, we have reason to be very fearful. Now, does it develop into a nuclear weapons? I would say no, actually, because we don't have a second strike capability and will get demolished. So there's no point for it, but there is a very, very good economic reason for developing nuclear weapon and nuclear industry, which you guys have not even touched on.
Now,
never. This has never been talked about.
You can keep the microphone. No, please keep the microphone. I don't want to shut you up. You're going to come next, this gentleman here. Keep the microphone. Will you respond to this gentleman? And you can keep going.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't remember Israel threatening to wipe out Iran in the same apocalyptic tones that Iran has threatened to wipe out Israel. I mean, I'm not here to defend Israel's nuclear capability. I agree that Israel should be brought into the NPT and brought to account like everybody else. Sorry?
You're joking.
Let me tell you this: if the Israelis,
sorry, I mean,
one question at a time. So we've left the microphone here. Would you like to take this gentleman's?
Okay, well, I'll come back to you in a minute. But let's just focus on the Israeli problem. The reason Israel has nuclear weapons is because it feels threatened, not because it wants to run around nuking people, right? That's why Israel I'm just explaining why Israel has nuclear weapons, right? The real one of the things I find very interesting about the current state of the Middle East is that we have this bizarre position where the majority of Arab states, forget Syria, but the majority of Arab states are as afraid of an Iranian nuclear capability as Israel. And this is one of the things that Obama is playing on when he's trying to revive the peace process. So why is it that the Arabs, not just Israel, why is it that the Arabs are so afraid?
Are they? Are they really?
Well,
I mean, you are saying this is a made up thing.
Well, I mean,
are the people in Egypt truly afraid of the Iranians having a nuclear weapon even?
It is not a made-up thing.
But the Iranians are going to attack Saudi Arabia.
It is not a made-up thing. Talk to the Saudis, talk to the Egyptians, talk to the Jordanians, talk to the Gulf states.
Talk to who in Egypt?
Well,
to who? To Saudi Arabian government who is
in the same way that I would talk to an Iranian
people?
government, I would talk to the Saudi government. And when I talk to the Saudi governments, this is what they tell me.
Okay, Julian.
This is a fact.
Julian, will you give the microphone to this gentleman? And bear with me. Julian, will you address this gentleman's, the spirit of it, the heart of it? He's talking about this world of Israel having cooperative efforts to have a nuclear bomb and Iran being pursued about it, and he wants the panel to address that difference that he's raised. So either disagree with him or address him.
Well,
you're arming my enemy. You're arming my enemy, and I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah. There is encouraging signs that the Obama administration is turning up the pressure on Israel to join the NPT. For the first time, they mentioned Israel as a non-signatory of the NPT who ought to sign. I mean, the solution to this is surely to return to some kind of rule-based system that is driving in the direction of getting rid of nuclear weapons, reducing their level, and not further proliferation. The focus should be on stopping proliferation running across the Middle East and disarming Israel. Now, in real terms, it will take a broad regional peace deal for that to go ahead, but it's certain that Israel's nukes will be on the table when that regional peace deal comes, and there should be pressure on Israel that within the parameters of that deal, it should sign on to a Middle East nuclear-free zone. That seems like a sensible direction.
You're absolutely refuse to consider that.
Right, you're going to have a second. I'd love to hear from you. Okay. This gentleman's been very patient. Please give us what you'd like to. We're on the politics.
Hi, Taj Mustafa from Hizb ut-Tahrir, spokesman in the UK, with a membership including in Iran. There's some, I have to be a bit blunt here, there's some irrationality that I sense. When Mr. Leyne, with all due respect, you talk about Israel, etc., whilst I'm not a fan of the Iranian regime, people are sensing a rational danger. America has troops in Iraq, 100,000 plus, Israel, all that's been mentioned, and yet sitting in Tehran, as a rational human being, you surely would want protection. And this assumption that, well, Israel has it, but she will behave rationally. Actually, the powers that have nuclear weapons today have not behaved rationally. America is marauding around the world and actually has used it in history, the only nation to have done that. So this rational aspect that somehow others will not be rational, with the picture right behind you there, but the Iranians are expected to not to have this fear. The second point Mr. Coughlin makes about the Arab world is actually more afraid of Israel than Iran. We need to get the facts straight. The people in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, in all these countries...
I think he said the other way around.
I didn't say that.
I think you meant the other way
sorry, not the other way around. The point is, if he says the Arab governments, who are all in the pockets of America, such as Mubarak, etc., yes, they do say that they are afraid of Iran. But the Arab masses is what matters here. The masses in the Arab world actually believe that Iran, as the Arab world, has a right to defend itself, and that issue is not addressed. Look at what the masses say.
This is on the nuclear program. What is the Iranian nuclear program for, and would you like to tackle one of them on the politics?
I think it's extremely rich in terms of the politics. When Western nations or Western journalists say Iran needs to give assurances, why to you?
Why
to the West?
That's your question.
I've got to answer that.
Why?
Well, here we go.
I'm not a politician. I've never said Iran should give assurances. I'm reporting what they're being asked to do do by Western countries. If you think the world is a safer place with an Iranian nuclear bomb, fine. I've never said it's not. I've never stood up and said Iran should disarm. I'm reporting a demand that is causing an international crisis. If you think the world's a safer place and there's a balance of terror, if you like, with an Iranian nuclear bomb, fine. I don't take a position on that. It's not my job to.
The million killed in Iraq is actually fair terror more from the US and UK government actions than any of what you're discussing.
I mean, would the world have been a safer place?
The fear of terror is from countries.
This is just nonsense propaganda. What million people killed in Iraq? I mean, what sort of nonsense are you talking? I mean, do we want to talk about facts, or should we have a civilized?
Can I just say one?
Let's just.
I would like.
Okay.
A million people were killed during the Iran-Iraq war.
Okay, bear with me. I'm just trying to, for the sake of us all, to keep it on the question. This gentleman, I've said you could come in on disarmament.
Yes. There's so many issues been raised here, it's very difficult to know what to pinpoint. But
well, do it.
Yeah.
That's the point. We're all gone in 20 minutes.
I certainly do not think that Iran having nuclear weapons would make the world a safer place. But I can understand the reasons why some people in Iran might feel that they ought to at least have the technical basis that they could produce it in the at some time in the future. I do not think that they are actively, from all my knowledge, which is not from direct being in Iran, but I've read a lot and heard lots of people speak about it and read about it, and I do not think that they do have an active nuclear weapon program at the present time. But I can understand why people should feel they want to. But I heard an American expert on the radio just the other week, a very well-known expert called Coughlin.
Gary Sick.
Gary Sick, sorry, yeah, Gary Sick, yeah. Who was responding to the latest statement by Obama, and he pointed out that there have been steadily escalating sanctions against Iran for the last 7, 8, 10 years, and the actual result of all those sanctions has been to worsen the situation. Therefore, the whole approach of the West, which has been represented by the panelists here, is actually the wrong way to go about it.
Okay, right. The Western approach is wrong. Keep the microphone a moment. What's right about the Iranian approach? Would you put that in a sentence for the room? What's been right about the Iranian approach?
Well, I didn't say there was anything right about it. I said it's not difficult to understand the reasoning behind it.
No, thank you.
And one last sentence.
Yep.
Ahmadinejad is not the primary source of power in Iran, so therefore focusing on him alone rather distorts the argument.
Okay, let's go around the panel and we'll come back to the floor.
We're just picking up on that point about who the real power in Iran is. It's the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And there was an interesting thing that came out during the New York talks, that Khamenei himself had basically committed Iran to a military nuclear program in 1984. And it's Khamenei that is driving this. He approved Ahmadinejad's very strange election victory. Since then, the cabinet's been reshuffled with a lot of hardliners. The guy that's now going to Geneva to negotiate Iran's nuclear future is a former chief executive of Khamenei's private office. It's Khamenei that's driving this, and this is a regime decision. And one thing nobody here has said tonight, which I find remarkable, I mean, if we go back to the elections of the summer, we saw an Iran that none of us have seen for many years. We saw a civilized, rational, intelligent, cultured Iran rising up and saying, we've had enough of this. But who did they turn to focus this sense of dissent on? Mir Hussein Mousavi, Khomeini's last prime minister, the man that before he stood down as prime minister executed thousands, we don't know the exact number, thousands of political prisoners were executed before he stood down. That's the choice they had. The real Iran is not represented by this regime, but this regime is driving the real Iran to the precipice.
Julian?
You were saying that, you don't think that the world will be a safer place if Iran gets a bomb, but you can understand the reason why they may want one. I mean, I think there's broad agreement on those two statements. The difficult thing is, where do you go from here? How do you put the kind of nuclear toothpaste back in the tube? And it can't be it doesn't seem to me to be a productive direction to allow Iran to do what it wants in violations of safeguards agreements it has on the IAEA. It seems to me the only productive direction to go to is to go back to those rules, and which means you don't have to get inside the head of Ahmadinejad or Ali Khamenei. You don't have to wonder what they're going to do. The only thing that matters is you signed up the NPT, there's some rules, you have to keep them, and the IAEA is the arbiter of those rules.
John, can I bear with me? Hold with me one second.
I mean, my voice hasn't been heard.
Well, it was once already. If you could just bear with me. No, bear with me. I'm going to come back to you. Just because, in the interest of discussion of the whole room, is there someone who would like to put the point that they are broadly supportive of, say, Western moves? Yes, I do. All right. Well, just for the sake of discussion, do you feel safer if Iran has a bomb? Do you support the Western moves?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. That's what I want to say. I'm saying what I want to say is that I see myself being the same views and attitudes that people have demonstrated in the streets of Iran, and I'm afraid none of these people have been the representative of that voice. I'm a woman. I've been driven out of my country. I think that undemocratic Iran, a government that doesn't have any respect for the human rights, is very dangerous when it has the nuclear weapon. And I would never, ever get my rights and be able to return to my country if that goes on, if that government gets nuclear power.
Gentleman at the back on the right, yes? I'm just taking your question there.
Sorry, I just had a question. Does the panel think that deterrence could work in the Middle East, or is there something inherent in power structures there that makes it impossible?
Right, that's a great question. And John, do you want to take it?
In theory, yes. And I think the point is that obviously the more countries that have the bomb and the more unpredictable you might perceive them, rightly or wrongly, you may believe the Iranian government is as rational as any other, the more dangerous it gets. And I know I covered the State Department at a time when Pakistan and India, I tell you, they came quite close to a nuclear war. The more of them out there, the more likely they are to be used.
And the lady here who was trying to say there's a mood in Iran, and the argument, she's supportive of the moves to clamp down on Iranian programming. Would you like to address her?
Look, I, as somebody who's there right through the election for 2 years before, I firmly believe that, and I've said so openly on air, I don't believe Mr. Ahmadinejad won that election. Not by a long shot.
That's why you're here.
That's why I'm here. Maybe it's why I'm here. As to perceiving the attitudes of the Iranian people to the nuclear program, it's very difficult to give you a clear answer on that, because it's one issue which there is very little freedom. There's a very tight red line on that people don't talk about it, and maybe they don't even think about it.
Julian, and the first question is next. Would you like to address the question of, if it's true Ahmadinejad didn't win the election? We've heard very passionate voices who are saying that Obama didn't win the Iranian election, that Iranians themselves do not feel as if they've been fairly treated, and they've given examples. So the criticism in the room is Iran is pursued, and you can understand, says the gentleman, why they want a deterrence, because they feel encircled and they feel this agenda against them. And would you like to address that? And then we'll move on to another question.
Well, I mean, I think we've been there. You know, Iran has got every right to feel, you know, it's been the victim through the ages and so on. It has every right to, under the NPT, to a nuclear power industry. It's really just a question of, you know, if there is going to be a nuclear renaissance, a second nuclear age in the world of of global warming, then the only way we're going to be able to do it is with very, very tight rules, you know, with far tighter rules that are in place right now. Additional protocol where the IAEA can go anywhere in the country and inspect anything, because without that, then it is a recipe for proliferation.
But you would agree that it would be helpful if Iran had a nuclear program that was actually geared to nuclear energy?
I mean, all you can say is they're right under the NPT to have a nuclear...
But you were saying earlier that Natanz is producing fissile material that's completely useless for its nuclear power reactor.
Well, it was John who said that, but
well, it's true. I mean,
yeah, I mean, their argument is we've been let down so many times. We want a store of uranium that we can draw on. It's true. It's
for what?
Well, their argument
not for
is
nuclear energy. I mean, this is the problem. This is why it doesn't work. I don't think anybody, nobody in Washington or Britain or anywhere else is denying Iran's right to nuclear power. Or nobody is denying them that right. We are concerned that they are building installations that are producing material that is completely useless for the nuclear power structures they have. And that is the problem.
Yes, sir. Here, first question.
This is a question rather than a statement. Something else has happened over the last couple of months, which is Russia has shifted her position in respect of the United Nations and in respect of sanctions. Russia is much closer to Iran than we are, and therefore Russia must have had a reason for shifting its position. I'd like to know the opinions of the three gentlemen on the platform as to why Russia is in a different place about Iran than it was 3
would you like to give us your opinion?
Sorry. My opinion is that Russia is genuinely worried about the regime, and there's been a change because Russia and China were the two nations who have economic reasons for protecting Iran's position in the UN, and Russia has already started to shift.
Well, it is true that the opposition protesters chant death to Russia as a riposte to death to America, but don't assume Russia is a solid or was a solid, reliable ally of Iran. The Tehran government is probably as suspicious of Russia as of any foreign country, Britain included, and would firmly believe what is probably the case, which is that Iran is a piece in Russia's great power game, which they will use as they will.
On Russia, would you like, because you were talking...
Well, I mean, missile defense obviously is raised as a possible reason why Russia has shifted its position, but has Russia shifted its position? As the Medvedev came up and said something about sanctions, but what kind of sanctions did he mean? That would be a whole other debate. But I mean, the good thing and the promising thing about this idea of exporting the uranium is that Russia was on board with the US. The US, Washington and Moscow worked it out between them. It's a way of bringing the US and Russia together on the Iran issue on something they agree on. That was what was promising about it, that Russia owned the initiative. But whether it will go any further, we'll see on October 19th, I think, in Vienna.
I have 2 points. First of all, Medvedev is not running Russia, Putin is. And Putin is looking at the big strategic goal, as you said, of just, I think John said, of using Iran for Russian interests. The other thing is that happened at Geneva is the Russians are very angry with Iran for not telling them about Qum, because the Russians have been running around saying, there's no threat from Iran and they're fine, we got them. They're moving in the right direction. And the Russians were deeply embarrassed about Qum. And that's why they're sort of trying to make up ground. But will the Russians really come to the party if, as I suspect, a further round of sanctions is necessary because of Iran's non-compliance? I very much doubt it, because if you're sitting in Mr. Putin's office, you're in a no-lose situation. If we engage with Iran, we're fine. The Russians are there. And if we have to get tough with Iran, that's going to have a negative impact on energy prices and resources. Who will we turn to? The Russians. So, I mean, that's what's really going on in the Moscow mindset.
I've got a question for the panel. 5 years ago, when Ahmadinejad came to the power, it showed purely that the mullahs are no longer in charge. And again, a year ago, when Ahmadinejad was again pushed into power by Basij, do you agree with me that the mullahs, they don't have the power as they used to have years ago, and now the Iran we have is a military power? And the struggle that you see today over the nuclear issue is really the struggle between Iran and Israel over the supremacy in the area, and the whole of these scenarios, the whole arguments and everything else we see it right now we're here is purely part of the propaganda by Israelis and the Americans in order to obviously create what it is. And my last question is to the gentleman here. Do you seriously go home worrying about Iranian nuclear attacks?
Okay, that last point first.
No, I don't go home.
What you said earlier.
I don't go home worrying about Iranian nuclear attacks. I go home worrying that if Iran had a military nuclear capability, what it might do with that, and who it might give it to, who it might share it with. And given Iran, let's not forget, Iran's involvement in international terrorism, stretching from Europe to East Africa to the Middle East, is well documented. It's got some very unpleasant friends.
It really depends what you call terrorism.
Okay, but
that's another night.
But
another discussion.
Are the mullahs less? Is it a more secular country with the mullahs less in control?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that was an absolute theme of the Ahmadinejad, and it's been a theme of the last 3 or 4 years. The Revolutionary Guards have been given power by Khamenei and have grasped it with both hands. The Revolutionary Guards and the Besieged. Being Iran, it's never quite that simple. It's also a division between different sections of the clergy. For example, Ayatollah Mesbi Yazdi is completely on board with the project. He's with Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad is with a section of the clergy, but not the Orthodox clergy in Qom. And the crunch is going to be when Ayatollah Khamenei dies, rightly or wrongly, it is strongly believed he's very ill indeed now, and he could die quite soon, within the next year perhaps. Will the military even bother with this, with the position of supreme leader, or will the military just take control? There are many people who believe that is the case. We'll have to wait and see. I'm not passing judgment, but I can say that there's a strong belief among many Iran watchers.
Can I come to you in a second? Your questions next. Would the whole room, people on all sides of this argument, just consider this, and the panel? We know it's a very youthful society in Iran. All of us grew up with a Cold War battle in Europe, and many of us took views on nuclear weapons. So we had, like this gentleman, we had a big group of us who were opposed to nuclear weapons of all kinds. Unilateral disarmament was a cry. We know what that means in our country. Was there anyone who'd like to talk about young people they know in Iran and what they think about nuclear weapons? And about the pluralism of the debate there. Yes, I know the feeling. The gentleman says, I'm really trying to ask you to be less political than you've been and be a bit more human. In Britain, we lived with a nuclear situation, and young people formed opinions, international opinions about nuclear. I'd like you to address it. Please don't hijack this question to repeat what you've said earlier. I want young people you've met in Iran, or you can speculate on them, and we'll take another political question as we come to a close. Please be fair. Directly approach yourself. What were you like growing up in Europe with the nuclear issue around you? How did it form your opinions? Sir, can you give him the microphone? And then you've got a question coming, yeah.
This is a perspective of young Iranians. Increasingly, young Iranians are worried about the environmental aspects of what's happening in the world, emissions of carbon dioxide, global warming. It doesn't go amiss on Iranians to note that in 2007, Iran actually overtook Britain in its emission of carbon dioxide emissions. And the question is, well, if Britain is going around to all these big conferences and says, well, actually, we should shut down or maybe reduce our emissions by 5% below 1990 levels and so on, why is it that we're telling Iranians keep on burning fossil fuels?
Very quick, simple answer to that. If Iran was so concerned about the environment, you might see the odd solar panel in Tehran, you might see the odd wind vane, and Iran, above all, would hugely increase the development of its natural gas resources, which is a clean fuel.
Okay. Generation of wind power electricity.
But it also has that. But also Iran has crazy fuel subsidies. I mean, the price of petrol is nothing.
Okay, there's a point of agreement here. Can we have the microphone back? So you were disagreeing with the panel earlier, and on this question you have some agreement. Please tell us why, because it's obviously a clue to how people live in the country, and you can help us.
Well, I think from at least a small group of people that I met this summer when I was back in Iran, it was they just don't see how it can be a defense. Frankly, they can't see how it can be a defense. You can't use it, and it doesn't. And so, what is the use of it? It's a non-question for a lot of people. People say it as a matter of pride. It's a matter of pride and all that sort of stuff. I think that's baloney. They very much believe that. I don't know whether you agree or not, but they believe in Iran they revere engineers.
Yes.
They revere doctors of technology.
And how many a year do
cabinet ministers forge their the CVs to show that they are. They revere it,
and
they don't say it as a matter of, oh, I've got a nuclear bomb, how wonderful I am, or anything like that. But they say, I have not reached a level of capability that few other people have.
And I'm sorry,
that's the.
I keep interrupting you. Do you know how many engineers Iran turns out a year? I've heard it has like 1 million. I mean, you know, there's all these students, but
I have no idea. But pretty much every small city has got a university now.
So there's a scientific pride in this project.
Very much.
It's like,
and it's not isolated to atomic energy. It is they're doing a hell of a lot about biotechnology, cloning, and all that. And they go to all the Olympiads and publicize we are second, third, whatever.
Panel, I'm trying to get us to consider the life inside Iran in our few final minutes. And the gentleman's saying, would you address that side of it? That it's not a warmongering nation. He said if mullahs aren't in charge. We've got very secular people who are very scientific, thank you, turning out probably more engineers than we do. Would you address that area?
Which is one of the reasons why I say it's very hard to say what do Iranians think, because the debate has been framed in different terms. You hear Ahmadinejad saying the West again trying to deprive us of scientific progress. And of course they support scientific progress. Iran is very proud of its scientific progress. When I did a report on cloning, and Iran produced the first cloned animal in the Middle East, it was replayed wall to wall on Iranian state TV for days. So yes, there's enormous pride, and rightly so, in Iran being ahead of most of the Middle East in science.
And to you, I said your question was next. Thank you for waiting. But you will need the microphone.
Oh, sorry. This question's probably a bit dated now, but comments come from the panel a few times that the material coming out of Natanz is no good for civil nuclear. Can you just qualify those remarks, please?
Okay, and perhaps explain to us the relevance of this again, that one plant produces uranium.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not a nuclear scientist. All I know is that there's the reactor that's been built by the Russians. The Bushehr one takes a certain kind of material to make it work. It's a bit like petrol and diesel, I suppose, in simple layman's terms. The Bushehr runs on petrol, and they've got lots of diesel, and it doesn't work. So that's the extent of my scientific knowledge.
Natanz wouldn't be any good for weapons straight off either.
We can't hear you.
That's a different issue.
No. Natanz can't be used in, just briefly, because it's a very important point to think of it. It cannot be used in Bushehr for technical reasons, I'm told. I'm not a nuclear expert, and if there's a nuclear expert who says I'm wrong, fine. It definitely cannot be used for political reasons, because the Russians are building Bushehr and completing it, or they may be completing it, on the basis that they will supply the uranium, and just as importantly, they'll take away the nuclear waste. And they wouldn't be doing it without that. And as one non-British, non-American diplomat put to me, if the Iranians broke that agreement, the Russians would probably bomb Bushehr themselves.
My understanding of this is, I mean, there's nothing about the uranium hexafluoride that comes out of Natanz that makes it unsuitable for Bushehr. It's a matter of the fuel fabrication. The fuel pellets that go in the rods are made of to certain specifications by the Russians. Now, it's not beyond the realms of science and engineering for the Iranians to back-engineer that and in a fuel fabrication plant of their own create the same sort of fuel. But at the moment, they don't have the capacity, and contractually, they are not allowed to.
Right, you took us back to the programme. The final 5 minutes, thank you for doing that, but we are going to move to the close, and there will be audience in just a second, people who have not asked a question before. Would you like to make some predictions? And you've heard the sense of the room. There's a strong feeling of an Iran pursued, of an Israel indulged. Also, people who do not feel safer with an Iranian bomb. Also, we've heard other people say they support Western plans and they're interested in Russia coming closer. So will you give us some closing thoughts based on those themes of our audience, and they can respond?
Well, I would come back to what I was saying earlier about the elections, because, you know, my sense of Iran, and I can't go there, I used to go there, you know, if I went there now, I probably wouldn't last very long. If the Iranian people, and we saw them on the streets, we saw their enthusiasm for change, were given a proper voice, we might see the proper Iran emerge. Because I do think, a bit like Saddam Hussein's Iraq, that Iran has been hijacked by an ideology that the vast majority of people no longer support or have any interest in, but they don't have a voice. And I think...
And on the nuclear programme, which is where we want to end.
Well, I mean, the nuclear programme, as I said, is being run by the regime. I mean, this gentleman here was in Iran. He's speaking to young people. They're not wedded to it. Of course, like any country, they take great pride in their technological expertise. But like most civilized countries, they want that technological expertise to be useful.
So on this gentleman's question, the leaders of the West aren't winning the public opinion war or fight for ideas in Iran because they're over the heads of the people. They're not addressing the people either. They're engaging in nuclear politics.
I think it would be very patronising for the West to try and do that. I mean, it's for the Iranian people.
Some closing thoughts, Julian.
I think we're really at a decisive moment. You know, if this deal goes ahead, they buy some time. There's possibility that a deal could be done. I think, you know, down the line, if a deal is done, there will be some kind of enrichment in Iran under some kind of international consortia with the IAEA, with full rights of additional protocol, etc. But if this deal isn't done and if things fall apart, then I think we're on a very serious, very dangerous road. The talk about imposing petroleum subsidies could easily lead to a clash in the Straits of Hormuz. It could lead to very serious tensions in the Middle East. It could lead to an Israeli strike, and we really don't want to go there. So I think we're just at a very pivotal moment now.
Right, you've just said a very great deal, which you didn't mention earlier. So this business of if Russia can process and enrich the Iranian supply and use it for medical reasons, that buys time for everyone. Does it save face for Iran?
Yes, because Iran, in its eyes, retains its rights under the NPT to have its program. It won't have climbed down. It's a business deal between one country and another. It opens the door for everyone to save face, step back from a very dangerous moment.
And what does the West give?
The West, I mean, the offer on the table is, well, the Russian enrichment, French fuel fabrication. The offer on the table from the E3+3 group is lots of economic assistance, help with building a proliferation-resistant nuclear industry.
John?
I don't think there's going to be a deal. I don't think there's any kind of consensus in Iran that they want to bargain away elements of the program, or indeed what they might want to get for that bargain. And I don't think there's enough authority in Tehran to get a consensus on that. I don't think there's going to be a deal for that reason. Plus, it's too useful for the Iranian government to keep this issue in play. It's something they can wheel out, and it's too useful for them. I know a lot of people have talked about Iran coming under undue pressure from the West and being unfairly treated. I think at the moment it's the other way around. I think what we're really seeing is Obama is too keen to get a deal. And we're seeing that. He's staked so much on it. That hand of friendship is one of the few really distinctive points of his campaign. And he's almost desperate for it. And you know what happens when people are desperate for things? The other side smells it. And the Iranians have smelt it. And I think this one's going to play and play. And we're going to have an awful lot more decisive moments like we have today.
Okay, some closing thoughts. For people who haven't spoken would be interesting, not because what you said earlier wasn't interesting, but the gentleman right in the middle. Thank you for playing along with this. I think we have heard a lot of views. Would you like... Yeah, that's very true. I think this speaks for itself, but if you could bear with me, the microphone's gone behind you.
I am a member of the diaspora, and I'd like to say that Iran is a wonderful country, rich history, rich culture, not warmongering. For the last 30 years, it's gone downhill. And it's continuing to go downhill. We shouldn't even be having this discussion about nuclear, about armament, about that, because that's not at the soul of the Persians.
Okay, thank you for that point. You've mentioned the room is full of men. Well,
no, you give only to men now, thank you.
Oh.
I'm a woman.
I don't think that's fair, but please, if you feel that, please explain. You can criticise
as far as, yes, I agree with the gentleman there about the environmental implications. There hasn't been any environmental study done on the environmental feasibility and the safety of these installations.
These are your closing thoughts?
Yes. As far as what the young people are thinking right now, Inflation, unemployment. 68% of the university graduates are women, and women are considered second-class citizens. There are no free elections, and there haven't been any free discussion on the viability and feasibility of this nuclear program. And one last point is that Iranians inside Iran at the moment, they're not thinking so much about nuclear, but about their lives. And this is a time when nuclear program is no longer the talk of the in the mouths of the people on the streets, but rather freedom and human rights. And unfortunately, Mr. Obama has made sure that human rights has taken second standing to all these questions.
Here's someone who hasn't spoken. It's a man, I'm afraid. Do you have an opinion that's worth hearing? You are a man, but if you can give it.
I would like to differ with the possibility of a deal, prospect of a deal.
Please start again.
Yes, I would like to differ about the possibility of a deal that you mentioned. I think there is definitely a pure chance of striking a deal between America and Iran this time. Look at Iran. The economy is in a mess. The government is at the back foot because of its opposition internally, and they don't want to open up a third front. That is what I believe would be the Iranian government's thinking. On the other hand, you have Obama, whose healthcare program has run into trouble. He doesn't want to be a war president. He already has a big headache in form of Afghanistan. And I mean, he's desperate for a success, as you mentioned. Okay. So this is the first time that both sides are talking to each other. So you can't say, oh, negotiations have gone on for 8 years and stuff like that. This is the first time these two countries are talking. So there's a definitely chance of a deal.
Optimism, chance of a deal, and just going around the room and we'll have a vote at the end. Yes?
Yes, I'm an American who's been living here for the last 11 years, and I've been pretty embarrassed with regards to American foreign policy. I think Obama's been a breath of fresh air. I think what he's trying to do has been good. I think that in the Middle East, there's not been kind of leadership amongst the Muslim people, if you will, in terms of the direction and dealing with issues such as these. So, you know, is he playing with fire? You know, do the Iranians, you know, smell that he's too desperate? Are they going to play ball? You know, I think it's time right now for other people within the region to step up and have an influence.
Finally, then, could I ask the room to divide? For you raise your hand if you think that there will be a deal to allow Russian uranium to be enriched further in Russia. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Iranian uranium to be enriched, which the panel has explained is very important. Do you think that's going to happen? Would you raise your hand? And do you not think it's going to happen, that deal? So that's the final word on that then. That deal that you say is crucial is not going to happen. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I hope that you had a chance to hear the arguments. And thank you to our panel as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.